Hello and welcome back to episode 11 of the 2024 Campaign Trail. We have a 2024 poll. We have a poll from Massachusetts. We have Kirsten Sinema and Charlie Baker. As you can see here, Kirsten Sinema is seemingly winning this poll by around 20 points, which is a huge underperformance of Joe Biden's numbers. He won the state by 33 points back in 2020. But this could be due to the popularity of Charlie Baker and a lot of independents who typically vote Democrat coming over to vote for him in this poll. We now have another 2024 poll. This time we have Charlie Baker and Stacey Abrams in the state of Georgia. As you can see here, Stacey Abrams has a very narrow lead over Charlie Baker in the state of Georgia, which is telling because she is currently the governor of this state. This is her home state, so you would think she would have a larger lead. We now have the coverage for the 5th Republican debate, Night 1 coverage at the University of South Carolina. Let's take a look at the bottom tier candidates. Greg Abbott had an above average performance at the debate. However, his enthusiasm, his base was not enthused with his performance. However, he looked strong and nonetheless throughout this debate. We don't know whether or not he will gain or lose support from this debate. However, we are leaning towards more so he will gain. Ben Carson had a phenomenal debate performance here tonight. However, his base was not as enthused with him, as, you know, the quiet talking demeanor of his isn't really something that enthuses his base as much. And of course, due to that, he also appeared weak throughout the debate because of that. However, we do expect him to gain a lot of support from this debate performance. Next up is Kanye West, who had an abysmal debate performance. However, his base was pretty enthused by his performance. And he did look pretty weak on a couple of the issues, which is the first time for Kanye. However, he did look strong on others, which is normal for his debate performances. We do not know whether he will gain or lose support. We are leaning towards more that he will lose support from this debate. And next up is Mike Lindell, the governor of Minnesota, who had an above average debate performance. His base was pretty thrilled with him. He dropped the election nonsense this debate, which kind of helped him a lot when it came to his appearance. He looked strong when actually talking about tabletop issues, and like what he did during his gubernatorial campaign for the 2022 election. He dropped the election stuff and he started talking about kitchen table issues, which helped him win that election very narrowly. However, this debate performance still hasn't helped him at all. We do expect him to lose support from this debate. We now have the Night 2 coverage of the 5th Republican primary debate. We have the top 10 candidates, top 10 polling candidates on the Republican side at this debate. First up, Nikki Haley, who had a below-average debate performance. Her base wasn't as enthused as she would have hoped. She looked pretty weak throughout the night. We do expect her to lose some level of support after this debate. Next up is Rick Scott, who had a phenomenal debate performance. This is unusual for Rick Scott, who continuously had a terrible debate performance. However, he stepped his game up here tonight, which has helped him greatly. As you can see here, his base was pretty enthused with his performance. He looked strong throughout the night, and we do expect him to gain some levels of support post-debate. And next up, Larry Hogan, who had a pretty bad debate performance throughout the night. His base was not happy with him at all. He looked pretty strong throughout the night, though, and despite a bad performance, we do expect him to gain some levels of support from this debate. Next up, Mitt Romney, who had a bad debate performance tonight. His base wasn't too happy with him, wasn't too excited either. He didn't look too weak, but he didn't look too strong either throughout the night, and we do expect him to lose some levels of support, a good chunk of support, after this debate. Next up, Tucker Carlson, who was continuously lowered on the podium, in his rankings. However, he had a pretty strong debate performance here tonight. His base is starting to lose him now, as they weren't too happy with him now. He looked pretty weak throughout the night. We do expect him to lose some levels of support from this debate. Next up is Charlie Baker, who had a pretty phenomenal debate performance, probably the best one this month besides Rick Scott so far. And however, his base was not too enthused with him. He looked pretty weak throughout the night. However, we do expect him to gain a good chunk of support from this debate. Next up, Josh Hawley, who had an above-average debate performance. His base wasn't too happy with him, wasn't too upset either. He did look pretty weak throughout the night. However, we do expect him to gain some levels of support from this debate. Next up is Jim Justice, who had an abysmal debate performance here tonight. However, his base was happy with him throughout the night. He did look pretty weak, looked pretty sloppy throughout the night. We do expect him to lose some level of support from this debate. Next up, Chris Sununu, who had an average debate performance here tonight. His base was pretty happy with him. He looked pretty strong throughout the night, but we are expecting him to lose some levels of support despite all of this. And the man at center stage, Ron DeSantis, who's been having back-to-back terrible debate performances as of late. However, he stepped up his game here tonight, had a pretty good debate performance. His base wasn't too happy with him. They started calling him Neocon Ron for some reason. I don't know why. He was spouting pretty populist rhetoric to me. He did look pretty weak throughout the night. However, we do expect him to gain some levels of support due to him having a higher performance at the debate. We now have the 2024 Republican primary poll results, the national results for the month of October. We have some pretty big changes after these debates, and Ron DeSantis still leads at 13.4%. Chris Sununu still at second at 13.3%. Larry Hogan is at third with 7.5%. Josh Hawley is at 6.7%. Ben Carson is bumped up to fifth at 6.6%. Greg Abbott is at 6.5%. Rick Scott is at 6.4%. Tucker Carlson is at 5.6%. Charlie Baker is at 5.5%. Kanye West is at 5.4%. Mike Lindell is at 5.3%. Jim Justice is at 5.2%. Nikki Haley is at 5%. And Mitt Romney is at 4.9%. We now have the polling results out of a 2024 Oregon Republican primary poll. As you can see here, Chris Sununu is leading this poll, and he's the only person to break 15%, so he would hypothetically win all of Oregon's pledged delegates here. Ron DeSantis sits at 10%, Kanye West at 8.3%, Mitt Romney at 6.7%, Charlie Baker at 6.6%, Greg Abbott at 6.5%, Tucker Carlson at 5%, Josh Hawley at 4.9%, Larry Hogan at 4.8%, Ben Carson at 4.7%, Jim Justice at 4.6%, Rick Scott at 4.5%, Mike Lindell at 4.4%, and Nikki Haley at 1.7%. We now have polling results out of a Iowa Republican primary poll. As you remember, Iowa will now be a primary instead of a caucus, so that is news to all of the candidates, which will help a lot of them. And Josh Hawley, who is neighboring of Missouri, his neighboring state of Missouri, Josh Hawley is leading the Iowa primary as of right now. However, Ron DeSantis has also broken 15%. He is at 15%, Ron DeSantis. Hypothetically, Hawley and DeSantis would split Iowa's pledged delegates if this were to occur. Mitt Romney is at 8.3%, Mike Lindell is at 6.7%, Jim Justice is at 6.6%, Chris Sununu is at 6.5%, Charlie Baker is at 6.4%, Nikki Haley is at 6.3%, Greg Abbott is at 6.2%, Tucker Carlson is at 5%, Ben Carson is at 4.9%, Rick Scott is at 4.8%, and Kanye West is at 3.3%. We now have some polling results out of a Kansas Republican primary poll. As you can see here, Greg Abbott sits at the top at 18.3%. Ron DeSantis is at 15%, and these are the only two candidates who broke the 15% threshold, so hypothetically, Abbott and DeSantis would split Kansas's pledged delegates. Chris Sununu not far behind from the 15% threshold at 11.7%. Mitt Romney also not far behind at 10%. Josh Hawley at 9.8%, Charlie Baker at 6.7%, Jim Justice at 5%, Ben Carson at 4.9%, Mike Lindell at 4.8%, Kanye West at 4.7%, Rick Scott at 3.3%, Tucker Carlson at 3.2%, and Nikki Haley at 1.7%. We now have some polling out of the Hawaii Republican primary. Chris Sununu is leading this poll at 20%, and as he is the only candidate to break 15%, he would hypothetically win all of Hawaii's pledged delegates in this scenario. Charlie Baker is in second at 11.7%, Ron DeSantis at 8.3%, Mitt Romney at 6.7%, Larry Hogan at 6.6%, Greg Abbott at 6.5%, Jim Justice at 6.4%, Josh Hawley at 5%, Ben Carson at 4.9%, Mike Lindell at 4.8%, Kanye West at 4.7%, Nikki Haley at 3.3%, and Tucker Carlson at 3.2%. We now have the 5th Democrat debate night 1 coverage from the University of Atlanta, Georgia. Let's take a look at the first round of candidates. Stacey Abrams had a pretty bad debate performance throughout the night, however, her base was enthused with her nonetheless. However, she did look weak throughout the night, and we do expect her, despite her looking weak, to gain some level of support from this debate. Amy Klobuchar had a pretty bad debate performance as well. Her base was not happy with her. She looked pretty weak on some of the issues, not all, just some, but we do expect her to lose some level of support from this debate. Pete Buttigieg, who has been lacking behind, similar to Tucker Carlson, was at the top of the rankings, now just just dropping down ever so slightly. He's the Tucker Carlson of the Democrat side, as Tucker Carlson is the Pete Buttigieg on his side. Formerly at the top, now in the middle of the pack, now slowly going to the bottom, doing everything they can to get back at the top. But Buttigieg's base was pretty happy with this performance, however he did look weak on a couple of the issues when it came to the issue of electability. We do expect him to gain some levels of support from this debate. Next up, Tulsi Gabbard, who had a phenomenal debate performance throughout the night. Her base was pretty happy with her. She looked pretty strong throughout the night. However, we don't know whether or not she will gain support or not. We are expecting her to lose a little bit support, just not much. Next up, John Fetterman, who had a pretty bad debate performance throughout the night. His base wasn't too happy with him. A majority of them were pretty happy, just not enough to where it'd be like, hey, I'm going to support this guy now. He looked pretty strong throughout the night. Pretty hard to look weak when you're almost 7 foot tall. We don't know whether he will lose or gain support, however, we are leaning towards more that he will lose support. Next up is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She had a pretty bad debate performance throughout the night. Her base was not too happy with her performance. She looked pretty weak throughout the night, but despite this, we do expect her to start attracting more progressive voters, as she will most likely take a much higher lead, or take more of percent of the polling going forward. She will gain more support, is what I'm trying to say. And next up, the frontrunner at the man at center stage at this debate is Governor Roy Cooper, who had a pretty bad debate performance. His base was not too happy with him. However, he was pretty strong throughout the night, talking about kitchen table issues throughout the night, which is helpful for him in his campaign. However, we do expect him to lose a good chunk of support. We don't expect him to be a frontrunner much anymore after this debate. We're going to have night 2 coverage for the 5th Democrat primary debate. Starting off with Senator Kyrsten Sinema, who had a pretty phenomenal debate performance throughout the night. However, her base was not too happy with her. She looked pretty weak throughout the night. However, we do expect her to gain some level of support despite all of this. Next up, Michelle Obama had a pretty bad debate performance. Her base was pretty happy with her performance. She looked strong throughout the night. However, we do expect her to lose some levels of support as all of her momentum has kind of gone down the drain. Next up is Howard Schultz, who had a pretty bad debate performance. His base wasn't as happy as, his campaign would have hoped. He looked pretty weak throughout the night, as he typically does throughout these debates. But despite this, we do expect him to gain some levels of support as he continues to buy his way onto the debate stage and buy support. Next up, Tammy Baldwin had a pretty phenomenal debate performance. Her base was pretty happy with her performance. However, she did look pretty weak on a couple of the issues, particularly agriculture and healthcare. We do not know whether or not she will gain or lose support. However, we do expect her. However, we are leaning towards more that she will lose some support. Next up, Mark Cuban had a pretty phenomenal debate performance here tonight. His base wasn't too happy with him, though. He looked pretty weak on a couple of the issues. Of course, electability comes up again, as he's never held elected office. People attacked him as another Donald Trump trying to, take power without the work. However, we do expect him to gain some levels of support from this debate. Next up is Kamala Harris, who had a pretty bad debate performance. Her base was not too happy with her. She looked pretty weak throughout the night, just laughing whenever she had hard questions. We don't know whether or not she will lose or gain support. However, we are leaning towards more that she will lose support. Next up, Sherrod Brown, who had a pretty good debate performance. His base was pretty happy with him. However, he looked pretty weak throughout the night. We don't know whether or not he will lose or gain support, however, we're leaning towards more that he will gain support. We now have polling results out of the 2024 Democrat primary poll, the national poll. Sherrod Brown still leads the pack at 12.5%. Roy Cooper is at 12.4%. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is at 8.4%. Kamala Harris is at 7.5%. Mark Cuban is at 7.4%, Amy Klobuchar is at 6.7%, Tulsi Gabbard is at 5.9%, Howard Schultz is at 5.8%, Kirsten Sinema is at 5.7%, Stacey Abrams at 5.6%, John Fetterman at 5.5%, Tammy Baldwin at 5.4%, Pete Buttigieg at 5%, and Michelle Obama at 4.9%. We now have Rhode Island primary polling on the Democrat side. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has a pretty wide lead here, most likely due to the support she has from Rhode Island Democrats, as she is leading by around 20 points over her opponents. As she's the only candidate to break 15%, she would hypothetically win all of Rhode Island's pledged delegates. Stacey Abrams at 11.7%, close to that 15% threshold. Pete Buttigieg also pretty close to the 15% threshold at 10%. Tammy Baldwin at 8.3%. Kirsten Sinema at 8.2%, Sherrod Brown at 6.7%, Howard Schultz at 6.6%, Roy Cooper at 5%, Amy Klobuchar at 4.9%, Mark Cuban at 3.3%, John Fetterman at 1.7%, and Tulsi Gabbard at 1.6%. We now have primary polling out of Alabama on the Democrat side, as we have two candidates who broke the 15% threshold. Mark Cuban at 16.7% and Stacey Abrams at 16.5%. Pretty close race between these two candidates, Cuban and Abrams. And hypothetically, they would both split Alabama's pledged delegates and say the only two candidates to break 15%. However, there is a candidate who is closer to that 15% threshold, and that's Roy Cooper, who is at 10%. Kirsten Sinema is at 9.9%. Tammy Baldwin is at 8.3%, Pete Buttigieg is at 8.2%, Amy Klobuchar is at 6.7%, Howard Schultz is at 6.6%, AOC is at 5%, Michelle Obama is at 3.3%, Sherrod Brown is at 3.2%, John Fetterman at 3.1%, and Tulsi Gabbard at 1.7%. We have Democrat primary polling out of the state of Washington. As we can see here, only AOC has broken 15%. She is at 20%, so hypothetically she would win all of Washington's pledged delegates. However, Stacey Abrams is close to the 50% threshold at 13.3%. Kirsten Sinema is also pretty close, sitting at 10%. Tammy Baldwin is at 8.3%. Howard Schultz is at 8.2%, Sherrod Brown is at 6.7%, Pete Buttigieg is at 6.6%, John Fetterman at 5%, Roy Cooper at 4.9%, Amy Klobuchar at 4.8%, Kamala Harris at 3.3%, Mark Cuban at 3.2%, Tulsi Gabbard at 3.1%, and Michelle Obama at 1.7%. We now have Democrat primary polling out of the state of Alaska. We can see here we only have one candidate to break 15%, and that is Mark Cuban. He would hypothetically win all of Alaska's pledged delegates. However, Tammy Baldwin very close behind at 14.9%. Kirsten Sinema also close to that 15% threshold at 11.7%. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at 8.3%. Stacey Abrams at 8.2%. Sherrod Brown at 6.7%. Amy Klobuchar at 6.6%. Pete Buttigieg at 6.5%. Howard Schultz at 6.4%. Roy Cooper at 5%. Kamala Harris at 3.3%. Tulsi Gabbard at 3.2%. John Fetterman at 1.7%. And Michelle Obama at 1.6%. We now have another 2024 poll, this time coming out of North Carolina, pitting Jim Justice and Howard Schultz. As you can see here, Jim Justice seemingly leading by around 4 percentage points over Howard Schultz, which is a huge overperformance of Donald Trump's numbers in 2020. Trump won the state by around 1%. If this poll were to hold, Justice would win the state by around 4%, which is the biggest Republican victory in North Carolina since 2004, if I'm not mistaken, when Bush won the state by around 6 points. So that would be a huge overperformance of Donald Trump right there if Jim Justice were to be facing off against Howard Schultz for the right to become president. We now have another North Carolina poll for 2024, this time pinning up against Florida Senator Rick Scott and Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin. As you can see here, Rick Scott is seemingly leading Tammy Baldwin by around 1%. He's pretty much running even with Donald Trump right now, which you don't want a candidate running even with Donald Trump if you were the Republican Party, considering he lost. You want someone who would do at least 1% better than Donald Trump, considering Democrats only need to do 1% worse or to, lose the election. Hypothetically, of course. Congresswoman Liz Cheney came out during a Mitt Romney rally in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and endorsed him for the presidency, saying that Mitt Romney is more experienced than the other Republicans on stage, isn't a crook like the Democrats running, that she trusts Romney to become president more so than anyone else. During a Chris Sununu rally in Newark, New Jersey, former Governor Chris Christie came out and endorsed Chris Sununu for the presidency. During a Ron DeSantis rally in Houston, Texas, Senator Ted Cruz, who had surprisingly recently dropped out of the race, came out and endorsed DeSantis for the presidency, saying that DeSantis has a proven record in Florida, that sounds familiar, and has, been strong when it came to the COVID-19 issue, strong when it came to the immigration issue, strong on the riot issue. There's nobody else in the race that will do as well as Ron DeSantis as the president. In a Mitt Romney rally in Fremont, Nebraska, Senator Ben Sasse came out and endorsed Mitt Romney for the presidency, saying Mitt Romney that he's never met a man as pro-America as Mitt Romney, someone who cares about the people as much as Mitt Romney, someone who will do things, whether it's right or left, to give the American people a better future. During a Kamala Harris rally in Lansing, Michigan, Senator Debbie Stabenow, who is speculated to retire this year from her Senate seat, has came out and endorsed Kamala Harris for the presidency, saying that it's only natural that the vice president succeed the president. At a Ron DeSantis rally at Terrence Hill, Iowa, Governor Kim Reynolds came out and endorsed DeSantis for the nomination. This will help Ron DeSantis in the state of Iowa, which it was already a neck-and-neck race between him and Josh Hawley. We'll just have to see if this endorsement will help DeSantis get over the finish line in the state of Iowa. At a Ron DeSantis rally in Cheyenne, Wyoming, this is seen by many as a slight against Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney, but the governor of Wyoming, Mark Gordon, came out and endorsed Ron DeSantis for the presidency. This was very shocking. Many thought he was going to endorse, Chris Sununu or Mitt Romney, but instead he came out and endorsed Ron DeSantis, who is essentially Mitt Romney's biggest political rival in this primary race so far. Again, most people see this as a slight against Cheney and Romney, but we don't have anything to confirm or deny that. At a Kamala Harris rally in Snyder, New York, Governor Kathy Hochul came out and endorsed her for the presidency. At an AOC rally in Malden, Massachusetts, progressive Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey came out and endorsed AOC for the presidency. He had previously endorsed Elizabeth Warren, who is now dropped out of the race, and endorsed Kamala Harris. Many expected Ed Markey to follow her in endorsing Harris. However, he's not endorsing Kamala Harris. He says he's endorsing AOC, even attacking Elizabeth Warren, saying that he was disappointed in her endorsement of Kamala Harris. Mitt Romney has held a rally in Los Angeles, California, trying to bring out the vote for the future Republican California primary. Ron DeSantis did phenomenal across the board, a phenomenal performance at the rally. As the crowd was roaring the entire time. He looked strong throughout the rally, and we do expect him to gain a bunch of support from this rally. Greg Abbott holds a rally in Las Vegas, Nevada, a early state for the candidates. He had a pretty good rally performance at the night. The crowd was enthused as always. However, he did look pretty weak as he was, restricted to a wheelchair, couldn't move as often as much as he would have liked. However, we are expecting him to lose support from this rally. Kanye West holds a rally in Montgomery, Alabama. He had a pretty weak rally performance. It was mostly an emotional rally. He was talking about stories, like emotional stories regarding black individuals. You can clearly tell he was trying to, sway over, moderate blacks to come over and support him in Alabama. He looked pretty weak throughout the night. The crowd wasn't as enthused. However, we do expect him to gain support as, he's doing something that really hasn't been done by Republicans, and that's target independent blacks and rural blacks and suburban blacks. We have the fundraising report for the month of October. Every candidate has met the donor threshold. Chris Sununu is at 31,400 donors. Tammy Baldwin is at 23,800 donors. John Fetterman is at 17,200 donors. Amy Klobuchar is at 6,300 donors. Rick Scott is at 15,400 donors. Sherrod Brown is at 16,100 donors. Stacey Abrams at 6,200 donors. Jim Justice at 18,800 donors. Greg Abbott is at 11,100 donors. Mike Lindell is at 8,100 donors. Ben Carson is at 11,800 donors. Kanye West is at 15,500 donors. Charlie Baker is at 14,000 donors. Larry Hogan is at 7,300 donors. Michelle Obama is at 8,200 donors. Kirsten Sinema is at 20,900 donors. Mitt Romney is at 7,500 donors. Josh Hawley is at 6,000 donors. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is at 13,500 donors. Howard Schultz is at 46,500 donors. Roy Cooper is at 7,700 donors. Tulsi Gabbard is at 9,900 donors. Mark Cuban is at 11,600 donors. Pete Buttigieg is at 24,900 donors. Kamala Harris is at 6,800 donors. Nikki Haley is at 8,100 donors. Tucker Carlson is at 29,400 donors. And Ron DeSantis is at 21,200 donors. And we now have the lineup for the 6th debates, the 6th Democrat and Republican debates. For the 6th Democrat debate night 1 lineup for November 2nd, we have Michelle Obama, Stacey Abrams, Amy Klobuchar, Roy Cooper at center stage, Kamala Harris, Howard Schultz, and Tammy Baldwin. For the night 2 lineup on November 3rd, we have Pete Buttigieg, Kirsten Sinema, Mark Cuban, Sherrod Brown at center stage, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Tulsi Gabbard, and John Fetterman. For the 6th Republican primary debate night 1 lineup, which will be held on November 9th, we have the bottom 4 candidates, Mitt Romney, Jim Justice at center stage, Mike Lindell, and Nikki Haley. And for the night 2 lineup held on November 10th, we have the top 10 candidates. We have Kanye West, Tucker Carlson, Greg Abbott, Josh Hawley, Chris Sununu, Ron DeSantis at center stage, Larry Hogan, Ben Carson, Rick Scott, and Charlie Baker. And we now have news for the 8th Republican primary debate, which will be held on December 5th and 6th, hosted by CNN, held at Little Rock, Arkansas in the Philander Smith College. The requirements for this debate: you need 7,000 unique donors, you need to be in the top 14 in the national average by October 30th, and you need 4% or more in 3 state polls or more. This is for the Republicans. And for the 8th Democrat primary debate, which will be held on December 12th and 13th, hosted by C-SPAN, held at Honolulu, Hawaii at the Hawaii Pacific University. The requirements: 7,000 unique donors, 5% or more in the national average. You need 4% or more in 3 state polls or more. And we have 14 Republicans, 14 Democrats currently in the race for the White House. No change from last month. Here are the candidates: New Hampshire Senator Chris Sununu, Florida Senator Rick Scott, West Virginia Governor Jim Justice, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Minnesota Governor Mike Lindell, former HUD Secretary Ben Carson, musician Kanye West, Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, Maryland Senator Larry Hogan, Utah Senator Mitt Romney, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and news host Tucker Carlson. On the Democrat side, we have Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown, Georgia Governor Stacey Abrams, former First Lady Michelle Obama, Arizona Senator Kirsten Sinema, New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, businessman Howard Schultz, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, Hawaii Governor Tulsi Gabbard, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, businessman Mark Cuban, and Vice President Kamala Harris. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to go follow my Twitter at Chaotic Politics. Also, a new poll will be in the description below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This is the Chaotic One saying, peace.